Ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all.
The sun was barely peeking over the rolling hills of Cypress Creek, Texas, casting a golden glow across my 40-acre ranch. I stood on the top porch, barefoot, my fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, the kind that could wake a coma patient. It was supposed to be another quiet morning, me, my goats, the hum of crickets fading into the dawn, and the promise of a day spent tinkering in my woodworking shop. That's what I'd earned after 25 years in the Navy, a life of discipline and chaos traded for solitude and simplicity. But as I took a sip, my eyes caught something that made my jaw drop and my coffee mug freeze midair. What on earth is this? I bellowed, my voice echoing across the open land, startling a couple of sparrows from a nearby oak. Down below, in the heart of my property, was a scene straight out of a Hallmark movie gone rogue. Rows of white folding chairs were lined up with military precision, their metal frames glinting in the early light. A pristine white cloth altar, draped like it was waiting for royalty, fluttered gently between two of my oldest oak trees, the ones I'd named Bonnie and Clyde after a particularly wild storm a decade ago. And there, parading around like they owned every blade of grass, were dozens of wedding guests, men in crisp suits, women in flowing gowns, and kids in tiny bow ties chasing each other through my pasture. A live band, complete with a fiddle player and a guy tuning a guitar, was setting up right next to my hay barn, their extension cords snaking through the dirt like they'd been invited. A catering truck, its engine still rumbling, was parked near my horse stable, and I could smell the faint aroma of barbecue ribs and roasted corn wafting through the air. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was still half asleep or caught in some bizarre dream. But no, this was real. My land, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a full-blown wedding venue overnight, and I hadn't gotten so much as a text message about it. My heart started pounding, not from fear but from a slow-burning rage that only comes when someone disrespects what's yours. And then I saw her, Karen. Oh, you know the type. That HOA Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Meadows, the gated community just beyond my property line. She stood in the middle of it all, radiant in a pearl-white dress that shimmered like she'd raided a bridal shop. Her blonde hair was piled high, her makeup flawless, and she was posing for pre-wedding photos in front of my horse stable like it was some five-star luxury lodge. Her voice cut through the morning air, sharp and commanding, as she waved her arms like a Hollywood director on a tight deadline. "Make sure the catering truck parks over there by the fence," she shouted, pointing toward my eastern pasture. "And the flower girl needs to come in from the gate path. Keep it clean. People, no dust on my dress." Dust? On my land? Without my permission? I stood there, barefoot in my flannel shirt and jeans, my coffee growing cold, trying to process the audacity. This wasn't just a mix-up. This wasn't a neighbor borrowing a cup of sugar. This was a full-scale invasion, and Karen was the general, orchestrating it all with a smile that said she thought she was untouchable. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Was this a prank? A misunderstanding? Maybe I'd missed a memo, though I doubted it. I'm not exactly the type to overlook a wedding invitation, especially one for my own property. I scanned the crowd again, looking for a familiar face, someone who might explain this insanity. But all I saw were strangers, laughing, sipping mimosas from flutes they'd brought in coolers, and snapping selfies with my barn in the background. One guy, in a pinstripe suit and a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, had the nerve to wave at me like I was the one interrupting their party. That was the moment something snapped inside me. Not the kind of snap that makes you lose control, but the kind that sharpens your focus, the kind I'd felt on missions overseas when the stakes were high and the enemy was clear. I turned on my heel, walked back into the house, and didn't say another word. My boots stayed by the door, my coffee mug hit the counter with a clink, and I headed straight for the back room where my dogs were waiting. Oh, yeah, my dogs. 40 of them, to be exact. Trained, licensed, and fully legal livestock guardian dogs, a mix of Great Pyrenees, Anatolian Shepherds, a couple of Kangles, and 2 German Shepherd rescues I'd taken in after they'd been abandoned. These weren't your average lap dogs. These were 100-pound beasts, bred to protect my goats from coyotes and mountain lions, with instincts sharper than a Navy SEAL's and loyalty that'd make a grown man cry. Normally, they roamed the perimeter, keeping watch over the herd, their deep barks a comforting soundtrack to my nights. But today, they had a wedding to crash. I opened the kennel doors, and the room erupted in a symphony of wagging tails and eager whines. "All right, boys and girls," I said, my voice low but firm. "Let's go say hello." I didn't need to say it twice. The moment I swung the gate open, all 40 of them bolted out, a tidal wave of fur and muscle charging down the hill. Tails up, ears perked, they moved like a pack of wolves with a mission, their paws kicking up dust as they sprinted toward the wedding party. I followed at a distance, my arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold like a scene from a comedy movie I hadn't signed up for. You should have seen it. The band was the first to crack. The fiddle player dropped his bow mid-tune, the guitarist tripped over an amp, and the drummer just straight up abandoned his kit, cymbals crashing to the ground as he ran for the hills. The guests weren't far behind. Women in high heels stumbled over chairs, their dresses catching on the grass. Men in tuxedos dove behind hay bales. One guy even tried to climb a tree before realizing my oaks weren't exactly built for that. Screams filled the air, a mix of panic and disbelief, as champagne flutes shattered and plates of hors d'oeuvres hit the dirt. The catering truck's driver, a burly guy with a beard, took one look at the oncoming pack and locked himself inside the cab, his eyes wide as saucers. And the cake, oh, the cake. A 3-tiered masterpiece, frosted in white buttercream with delicate sugar flowers, stood proudly on a table near the altar. It didn't stand a chance. One of my Pyrenees, a big lug named Tank, barreled through the setup, his massive frame sending the table crashing down. The cake collapsed in a spectacular explosion of frosting and sponge, splattering guests and decorations alike. I swear I saw a sugar rose land on a kid's head who promptly burst into tears. It was chaos, pure and simple, and I'd be lying if I said a small part of me didn't enjoy it. But the real show was Karen. She stood frozen in the middle of it all, her pearl-white dress now speckled with dirt, her perfectly styled hair starting to fray. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide, like she'd just seen a ghost wielding a chainsaw. She clutched her bouquet, a ridiculous bundle of roses and peonies, like it was a lifeline, her knuckles white. For a moment, I thought she might scream or run, but she just stood there, rooted to the spot, as my dogs closed in. The pack parted around her, their training kicking in. They weren't here to hurt anyone, just to make a point. But Karen didn't know that. To her, those 40 sets of teeth and glowing eyes were the end of the world. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any better, Bear stepped forward. Bear, my oldest dog, a massive Great Pyrenees with a coat like fresh snow and eyes that could see through your soul. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked right up to Karen, sat down in front of her, and stared. That was it, just a calm, steady stare, like he was sizing her up and finding her wanting. Karen's trembling got worse, her high heels wobbling on the uneven ground. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, with all the drama of a soap opera diva, she fainted. Face first, right into what was left of the wedding cake. Frosting smeared across her cheeks, raspberries tangled in her hair, and the bouquet rolled into the dirt. I stood there, stunned myself, my anger giving way to a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. The guests were still scattering, some climbing over fences, others hiding in the bushes. The band's abandoned guitar lay in the grass, its strings glinting in the sun. The catering truck finally roared to life, peeling out like it was fleeing a crime scene. And Karen, well, she was out cold, a frosting-covered mess in the middle of my pasture. My dogs, their mission accomplished, started to wander back toward the barn, tails wagging like they'd just played the best game of fetch ever. But then I heard its sirens. 3 squad cars came tearing down my gravel path, lights flashing, kicking up clouds of dust. Leading the charge was Sheriff Daniels, a lifelong friend who'd served with me in Afghanistan and shared a fishing trip just 2 weekends ago. He stepped out of his cruiser, took one look at the scene, dogs trotting away, guests limping out of hiding, folding chairs tipped over, and Karen passed out in a pile of cake, and narrowed his eyes at me. "Rick," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, like he was walking into a circus fire. "Mind explaining what the hell happened here?" I raised my hand, not in surrender, but in a gesture of calm, like I was back in the Navy dealing with a tense situation. "I was making coffee," I said plainly, gesturing toward the house. And then I saw a full-blown wedding happening on my land. Daniel's deputy, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, glanced around. Champagne bottles were scattered, the altar cloth was tangled in a tree, and one guest was still holding a violin like it was a shield. Karen, now groaning as 2 older ladies in feathered hats fanned her, looked like she'd been through a war zone. Daniels took off his sunglasses, his expression a mix of amusement and exasperation. "You serious right now?" he asked. "Dead serious," I replied, my voice steady. I had no idea they were here. Didn't invite them, didn't give permission, didn't even know about the wedding until I walked outside. The deputy piped up, holding a notepad. She told us she rented this land for the day. Said it belonged to a cousin who was out of town. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Daniels raise an eyebrow. "Is that true?" he asked. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a photo of my property deed, my name clear as day, and handed it over. No cousin, no rental. Just me, my goats, my dogs, and apparently a surprise bridal party. Daniels looked at the photo, handed the phone back, and exhaled deeply. "All right," he said. "I'll talk to her when she wakes up." "You mean if she wakes up?" I muttered, glancing at Karen, who was now sitting up, frosting still smeared across her face. She took a full faceplant into a buttercream war zone. The sheriff's radio crackled, and he stepped away to take the call. As he did, I looked around. My dogs were back at the barn, happily munching treats like they hadn't just turned a wedding into a disaster movie. The guests, dusty and wide-eyed, were starting to regroup, muttering among themselves. One teenage girl in a flower crown approached me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "This was the most epic wedding ever," she said, like I'd just thrown the party of the century. I didn't respond, just stared at the mess, trampled grass, broken chairs, a guitar in the dirt, and took a deep breath. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen wasn't just some nosy neighbor who'd made a mistake. This was personal, the latest move in a 6-month war she'd been waging since the day I moved in. And as I stood there, watching the dust settle and the sirens fade, I knew one thing for sure. I was done playing nice. Karen had crossed a line, and I was about to show her what happens when you mess with a man's land, his dogs, and his peace. The dust from the wedding fiasco had barely settled, and the faint smell of crushed cake and spilled champagne still lingered in the air around my ranch. I stood on the porch that evening, Bear sprawled at my feet, his massive white head resting on his paws like he was contemplating the chaos we'd just unleashed. The other dogs were back in their kennels, tails wagging, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. Sheriff Daniels had left with Karen in tow, her frosting-smeared face a perfect metaphor for the mess she'd made. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly. This was just the opening act of a drama that had been building for months, and I was about to replay every infuriating moment in my head to figure out how we'd gotten here. It all started 6 months ago, when I rolled into Cypress Creek with a pickup truck full of dreams and a heart full of hope. After 25 years in the Navy, I'd seen enough of the world's chaos, deserts, oceans, and battlefields that left scars both visible and not. Retirement was my chance to reclaim something simpler, something mine. I'd found this 40-acre ranch just outside town, a slice of paradise with rolling hills, a pond that sparkled in the morning light, and enough quiet to make you forget the world existed. My plan was straightforward: raise a few goats, build a woodworking shop, and sip coffee on my porch while the crickets sang me to sleep. The ranch was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of service, and I'd be damned if anyone was going to take that from me. But trouble doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it shows up with a clipboard and a fake smile. Enter Karen Hamilton, the self-appointed queen of Willow Meadows, the shiny new gated community that bordered my property. Willow Meadows was everything my ranch wasn't: manicured lawns, cookie-cutter houses, and a homeowners association that ruled with an iron fist. My land, thank God, wasn't part of their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop Karen from acting like she owned every square inch of Cypress Creek, including my dirt. The first time I met her, I was still unpacking boxes, my boots caked with mud from checking the fences. She marched up my gravel path like she was leading a parade, her heels clicking, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with blonde hair sprayed into submission and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm Karen Hamilton, president of the Willow Meadows HOA. We need to talk about your property." I raised an eyebrow, wiping sweat from my brow. "My property's just fine, ma'am. What's on your mind?" She didn't waste a second. "Your fencing," she said, pointing at the sturdy wooden posts I'd spent a week installing, "is unsightly. It doesn't match the aesthetic of our community." I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard. "And your dogs," she continued, glancing at Bear and Tank, who were lounging in the shade, "are a violation of the neighborhood tone. They're too loud, too large, and frankly, they scare the residents." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. Bear, all 120 pounds of him, lifted his head, gave her a lazy look, and went back to napping. Scary my ass. I kept my voice calm, the way I'd learned to when dealing with bureaucrats overseas. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my land isn't part of Willow Meadows. My fences are on my property, my dogs are licensed and trained, and I like things just the way they are." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Well," she said, scribbling something on her clipboard, "we'll see about that. We have standards, Mr. Johnson, and we expect cooperation." She turned and strode off, leaving me standing there, half amused, half pissed, and fully aware I'd just made an enemy. From that day on, Karen made it her mission to civilize my ranch, as she so eloquently put it in one of her many complaint letters. It started small, notes left on my gate about the unpleasant odor of my goats, which was rich coming from a woman whose perfume could knock out a horse. Then came the emails, copied to half the HOA board, about the excessive noise of my dogs barking at night. Never mind that they were doing their job, guarding the herd from predators. She even had the gall to complain about my tractor, claiming its engine was disruptive to the community's tranquility. I ignored most of it, figuring she'd tire herself out eventually. But Karen wasn't just annoying, she was relentless, a human bulldozer with a vendetta. Things escalated about a month in when she called animal control. I was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when a county van pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, looking more embarrassed than official. "We got a report about neglected animals," one of them said, scratching his head as he surveyed the scene. My dogs were sprawled out in their shaded pens, bellies full, water bowls sparkling. The goats were grazing happily, their coats glossy from good feed. I invited the officers to look around, and they did, chuckling as Bear rolled over for a belly rub. "Mister," the older one said, "your dogs live better than I do." They left with an apology, saying the complaint was clearly baseless. I didn't need to ask who'd made the call. Karen's name was written all over it. I tried to be polite. I really did. I'd nod when I saw her in town, keep my responses short when she'd corner me at the feed store with another lecture about community standards. But every interaction chipped away at my patience. She wasn't just meddling. She was trying to control me, to bend my ranch into something it wasn't. And I wasn't about to let that happen. My land was my freedom, my stake in the world, and no clipboard-wielding tyrant was going to take that away. Then came the incident with the photographer, the first real sign that Karen's audacity knew no bounds. It was a sunny Saturday, the kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. I was out by the pond, checking the water levels, when I heard a faint buzzing overhead. I looked up and saw a drone, hovering low, its camera pointed at my pasture. My first thought was poachers or surveyors, so I followed its path, jogging through the grass until I spotted the culprits, a young couple in wedding attire, posing by my pond like it was a professional studio. A photographer, complete with reflectors and a tripod, was barking orders. Smile wider. Tilt your head. Let's get that rustic vibe. I approached, my boots crunching on the gravel. Excuse me, I said, keeping my tone even but firm. You got permission to be here? The photographer, a wiry guy with a man bun, looked up, startled. Oh, yeah, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Karen said it was fine. This is her cousin's land, right? The couple nodded, looking confused but not guilty. I took a deep breath, my fists clenching. No, cousin, I said. This is my land, and nobody asked me. The photographer stammered an apology, packing up his gear faster than you can say, lawsuit. The couple looked mortified, saying they'd been told it was all arranged. I let them go with a warning, but I wasn't done. I drove straight to Willow Meadows, found Karen's pristine white house with its perfectly trimmed hedges, and knocked on her door. She answered in a yoga outfit, her smile as fake as ever. Mr. Johnson, she said. What a surprise. Cut the crap, Karen, I said, my voice low. You sent a photographer onto my land without asking. You told them it was yours to use. That stops now. Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes narrowed. I was just helping a young couple get a rustic shoot, she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. You're being difficult for no reason. I stepped closer, my shadow falling over her doorstep. Do it again, I said, and there'll be consequences. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that made my blood boil, and closed the door in my face. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat. She didn't respect boundaries, didn't respect me, and sure as hell didn't respect my land. I started keeping a closer eye on things after that, installing trail cams around the perimeter and checking my fences daily. For a while, it was quiet. Too quiet, in hindsight. I thought maybe she'd gotten the message that my warning had sunk in. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was biding her time, planning something bigger, something that would make her little photo shoot look like child's play. The first clue came about a week before the wedding. I was out riding the eastern fence line on my ATV, checking for storm damage, when I noticed tire tracks in the dirt. They weren't mine. My truck's tires had a distinct tread, and these were narrower, probably from a van or a sedan. I followed them to a spot near the gate, where the tracks stopped abruptly, like someone had realized they were trespassing and turned back. I shrugged it off at first, figuring it was utility crews or maybe hunters scoping out the area. But then I started finding other things, pink ribbons tied to tree branches, white spray paint marking patches of grass, and most damning, a note taped to my gate post. It was typed no signature, just a single line, reserved for Saturday, 4 p.m. wedding. My stomach dropped. A wedding? On my land? I read the note again, then again, hoping I'd misread it. But there it was, clear as day, no name, no contact, no permission. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office, hoping they could do something. The dispatcher was polite but unhelpful. Unless someone's actively trespassing, she said, there's not much we can do. Keep an eye out and call us if anything happens. I hung up, frustrated but not surprised. Small-town sheriffs have bigger fish to fry than mysterious notes. So I did the only thing I could. I waited. The days leading up to Saturday were tense. I doubled my patrols, checked the trail cams every night, and kept my dogs on high alert. I didn't know what Karen was planning, but I knew she was behind it. The ribbons, the paint, the note, they all had her fingerprints, metaphorical and maybe literal. I started sleeping with my boots by the bed, my shotgun loaded but locked in the safe. Not that I thought it'd come to that, but I wasn't taking chances. Karen had already shown she didn't play by the rules, and I wasn't about to let her catch me off guard. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that makes you want to crack open a beer and forget the world. I was in my shed, sanding a cedar plank for a new workbench, when I heard voices. Not the usual sounds of birds or the distant hum of traffic, but actual human voices, laughing and chatting like they were at a picnic. I set down my tools, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stepped outside. That's when I saw it, the full-blown wedding, unfolding on my land like a circus I hadn't bought a ticket for. The chairs, the altar, the band, the guests, and Karen, strutting around like she was the bride, the planner, and the queen all rolled into one. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Years in the Navy had taught me to think before acting, to assess the situation before charging in. I walked back to the house, my mind racing. This wasn't just a trespass. It was a violation, a middle finger to everything I'd worked for. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it. And as I reached for the kennel gate, I knew exactly how I was going to respond. I whistled once, sharp and clear, and my pack came charging, 40 sets of paws thundering down the hill. The guests screamed, the band fled, and Karen's perfect little fantasy crumbled faster than that 3-tiered cake. But even as the dogs did their job, scattering the intruders and leaving Karen in a heap of frosting, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't going to let this go. She'd come back swinging, probably with lawyers, complaints, and a whole new level of crazy. And I was ready for it. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in 6 months of dealing with her, it's that Karen didn't just want control, she wanted dominance. She'd lied about my land, used it like her personal playground, and now she'd escalated to fraud, telling people it was hers to rent. That wasn't just annoying, it was illegal, and I wasn't about to let it slide. As the sirens faded and the last of the guests limped away, I stood on my porch, Bear at my side, and made a decision. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more polite warnings or ignored complaints. Karen had started this war, but I was going to finish it. I didn't know how yet, maybe with lawyers, maybe with the press, maybe with something bigger, but I knew one thing for sure. She'd regret the day she set foot on my ranch. And as the stars came out over Cypress Creek, I sipped my coffee, now cold, and started planning my next move. The morning after the wedding crash felt like the calm before a storm. The sun rose over my ranch, casting long shadows across the trampled grass and scattered champagne flutes that still littered the ground. Bear and the rest of the pack were sprawled out by the barn, snoozing like they hadn't just turned a fancy HOA shindig into a scene from a disaster flick. I stood on the porch, sipping coffee that was stronger than my resolve to stay calm, replaying the chaos in my head. Karen's frosting-covered face, the guests diving over fences, the sheriff's exasperated stare. It was almost funny, except it wasn't. This wasn't just a one-off trespass. This was war, and Karen had fired the first shot. But if she thought I was going to roll over, she was about to learn a hard lesson about messing with a Navy vet and his 40 dogs. The days that followed were a blur of cleanup and strategy. I spent hours picking up debris, broken chairs, torn tablecloths, a lone high heel stuck in the mud like a monument to Karen's audacity. My trail cams had captured everything, and I backed up the footage on a hard drive, knowing I'd need it. The note taped to my gate, the pink ribbons, the spray-painted grass. I kept it all, every scrap of evidence that pointed to Karen's scheme. I wasn't just mad, I was methodical. Years in the military had taught me that battles aren't won with rage alone. You need a plan, and I was building one. brick by brick. My first call was to Jack, my lawyer and an old Navy buddy who'd seen me through more than one scrape. "Jack," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, "it's Rick. I've got a trespassing case, property damage, and probably fraud. Karen held a damn wedding on my land without permission. We're talking guests, a band, a cake, the works." Jack let out a low whistle, the kind that says he's already picturing the headlines. "You got proof?" he asked. "I've got video," I said. "Security cams, trail cams, even a drone shot from one of her guests showing her barking orders like she's running the Pentagon." Jack chuckled. "Send it over. I'll start the paperwork today." That was step one, legal action. I wasn't just going to sue Karen for trespassing. I wanted a restraining order, a permanent ban keeping her and her clipboard away from my ranch. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd already shown she was willing to lie, claiming my land belonged to some fictional cousin. Fraud like that doesn't just fade away, it festers, and I needed to hit her where it hurt most, her reputation. So I made my second call, this time to Monica, a reporter from the local news station. Monica was a no-nonsense type, the kind who could smell a good story from a mile away. "You're telling me the HOA president held an illegal wedding on your land?" she asked, her voice sharp with excitement as I queued up the footage on my laptop. "Without permission," I said. "Lied about ownership, damaged my barn, and hasn't apologized." Monica's eyebrows shot up. "This is gold." I shook my head. "I'm not doing this for fame, Monica. I'm doing it because someone's gotta stop her." She leaned in, her pen tapping her notepad. "And you're saying you had 40 dogs chase them off?" I grinned, a slow, deliberate smile. "I didn't tell them to attack. I just opened the gate. They did the rest." She laughed, a sound that echoed through my kitchen. "Oh, this is going viral." And it did. By sunset, the news segment aired under the headline, "Wedding Crashers. HOA president accused of trespassing on rancher's land." It showed clips of panicked guests, the smoldering generator shed, more on that later, and Karen's frosting-smeared face as she fainted into the cake. The comments section exploded online. That Karen got what she deserved, one user wrote. "40 dogs? Man's living the dream," said another. My favorite, "If someone did that on my land, there'd be more than just cake flying." The story spread like wildfire, picking up traction on social media, even catching the eye of a few national outlets. I didn't care about the fame, but I cared about the message. Karen wasn't untouchable, and I was coming for her. But Karen wasn't one to take a hit lying down. The next day, a man in a cheap suit pulled up in a rented sedan and handed me a stack of papers. "Karen Hamilton is filing a civil complaint against you," he said, his voice flat, like he'd delivered bad news 1,000 times. "Reckless endangerment, emotional distress, and public humiliation." I stared at the paperwork, my jaw clenched. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "She's demanding a public apology, replacement of the cake, and compensation for ruined tuxedos." I didn't say a word. I just turned, whistled, and watched as 40 tails wagged in the distance. The man's eyes widened. "Are those the dogs?" he asked, already backing toward his car. "Yep," I said, and he was gone faster than a roach from a kitchen light. I called Jack, who burst into laughter so loud it nearly blew out my phone speaker. "She wants you to apologize?" "On your land," he said, still chuckling. "Oh, it gets better," I replied. "She's also requesting a cease and desist for defamation." Jack paused, his tone shifting to serious. "You want to settle this quietly?" I looked out at the ranch, still scarred with tire tracks and torn grass, a chunk of what I think was a dance floor half buried in the dirt. "No," I said. "I want her in court." That same week, I filed a countersuit. Property damage, fraud, unauthorized use of private land, destruction of a generator unit, emergency service costs, emotional trauma for my dogs, you name it, I threw it in. Jack was gleeful, piling on every charge we could legally justify. "We're not just fighting her," he said, flipping through his legal pads. We're burying her in paperwork. But the real surprise came not from the courts, but from the community. People from Willow Meadows started showing up at my gate, one by one, like pilgrims on a mission. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to brought pies, homemade cards, even dog treats for Bear and the pack. An older man named George, his hands rough from years of manual labor, handed me a box of biscuits. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice gruff. Karen's ruled that neighborhood with an iron fist for years. Nobody stood up to her until you. A young couple, their baby in a carrier, stopped by next. "She tried to ban our swing set last year," the wife said, her eyes flashing with anger. "Said it wasn't regulation height. You're a hero around here." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a guy who just wanted to drink his coffee in peace. But their words stuck with me, lighting a fire I hadn't realized was there. Karen hadn't just messed with me, she'd messed with everyone, and now the town was rallying behind me. Then came the groom. He showed up one evening, a kid in his late 20s, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Johnson," he said, standing awkwardly at the fence. "Can I talk to you?" I nodded, crossing my arms. "I'm Paul," he said, "the groom from the wedding. I'm sorry for everything. We thought Karen had cleared this place with her cousin. We didn't know it was your land until the dogs came." He paused, a faint smile breaking through. Which, by the way, was honestly the most unforgettable part of the day. I chuckled, despite myself. "I'll take that as a compliment." He held out an envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "We wanted to repay you, just a little, for the damage, for the trouble." My wife's still crying about the whole thing. "We feel terrible." I took the envelope, not sure what to say. Later that night, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "We were lied to, but we still got married. Thank you for standing your ground. Paul and Jenny." Tucked inside was a check for $2,000. I sat there, staring at the note, something warm settling in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about people like Paul and Jenny, caught in Karen's web, and I was their way out. The court date loomed, and I spent every spare moment preparing. Jack and I went over the evidence like generals planning an invasion. The trail cam footage showed Karen directing workers to set up decorations 2 days before the wedding. The drone video, recovered from a guest's SD card, caught her saying, "He's just an old cowboy. He'll never find out." My property deed, the note on my gate, the witnesses, it was a mountain of proof, and Karen had nothing but lies and a bruised ego. But I wasn't naive. She'd come armed with her lawyer, David Crest, a slick city type who probably charged by the syllable. I needed something more, something that would hit her where it hurt. That's when Raymond Carter walked into the picture. Raymond was Karen's cousin, a retired detective who'd served as Willow Meadows security consultant until recently. Karen loved name-dropping him in HOA meetings, claiming she had law enforcement on speed dial. But Raymond wasn't her lapdog. He'd heard about the wedding, seen the news, and reached out to me quietly a week before the trial. "Rick," he said over coffee at a diner in town, "what Karen did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. She used my name, my badge, to intimidate people. I'm done letting her hide behind me." I leaned back, sizing him up. "You willing to say that in court?" I asked. He nodded, his jaw tight. "I've got files, complaints from neighbors, proof she's been abusing her power for years. Let's take her down." The morning of the trial, I put on my best jeans, not the ripped ones, but the ones I wore to church on Easter, and a clean button-up shirt. Bear watched me from the porch, his eyes knowing, like he sensed something big was coming. "You can't come to court, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "But don't worry, I've got backup." I drove to the courthouse, Jack beside me, a thick binder under his arm. The courtroom wasn't packed, but a few faces stood out, neighbors from Willow Meadows, a couple of reporters, and a guy from the feed store who gave me a thumbs up. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, her pale blue blouse and pearl earrings screaming innocent grandmother, but her eyes were cold, calculating. David Crest, her lawyer, looked smug, like he thought this was a slam dunk. Judge Walters entered, a no-nonsense woman with glasses perched on her nose and a reputation for cutting through bullshit. "Let's make this quick," she said, adjusting her papers. "We have a full docket." Crest stood first, launching into a rehearsed spiel. "Your Honor, my client has suffered public humiliation, threats, and deep emotional trauma as a result of Mr. Johnson's actions and the media frenzy he fueled. We seek $50,000 for emotional distress and defamation, plus a cease and desist order for all future contact." The judge nodded, scribbling something, then turned to us. "Mr. Johnson?" Jack stood, calm as a summer breeze, and handed the judge our binder. "Your Honor, enclosed you'll find security footage showing the plaintiff orchestrating a trespassing event on private land, photos of property damage, a statement from the bride and groom confirming they were misled, and video from trail cams." The judge opened the binder, her eyebrow arching at the first page. "Is this a cake with paw prints?" she asked, her tone dry. "Yes, ma'am," Jack replied. "Those belong to Mr. Johnson's legally licensed guard dogs, released on his own property after discovering an unauthorized wedding." The courtroom snickered, even the bailiff biting his lip. Karen's face turned redder than a barn fire. Jack wasn't done. "We're countersuing for property damage, unauthorized use of private land, interference with livestock protection services, and emergency response costs. We're also filing for a permanent protective order preventing Ms. Hamilton from coming within 200 yards of Mr. Johnson's ranch." The judge raised her hand. "All right, I've heard enough." Karen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Your Honor, I deserve to speak." The judge glared. "Miss Hamilton, don't test me." Then the doors creaked open, and in walked Raymond Carter, his presence like a thunderclap. Karen froze, her eyes wide, because this wasn't just her cousin. This was her trump card, the man she'd bragged about for years. But Raymond wasn't here for her. He marched to the judge, a stack of folders in hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I served as Willow Meadows HOA security advisor for 2 years. I'm here voluntarily because what Miss Hamilton has done damages this community and may violate state ordinances." Karen gasped, "Raymond, don't." He ignored her, his gaze fixed on the judge. "She used my name, my badge, to intimidate residents and lie her way into events like this wedding. I've brought complaints from 7 neighbors describing similar abuse of power." Jack smiled, a rare crack in his poker face. "And that, Your Honor, is the pattern of behavior we've been trying to prove." The judge flipped through Raymond's files, her expression hardening. "Miss Hamilton," she said, her voice like steel, "you trespassed, lied about property rights, caused a fire, damaged a generator, disturbed livestock, accused a veteran of harassment, and now you want him to pay for your embarrassment?" Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The judge smacked her gavel. "Case dismissed. Countersuit accepted. Miss Hamilton, you will pay all damages and court costs. You are ordered to stay at least 200 yards from Mr. Johnson's ranch for 5 years. Violate that and you'll face criminal trespassing charges. And if I see you in my courtroom again, you'd better be wearing a jumpsuit." Karen slumped, her spine giving out, her lawyer staring at his briefcase like it had betrayed him. The gallery clapped, not loud, but enough to feel like a wave of support. I felt pats on my back, a handshake from George, and a whispered, "We need more guys like you, Rick." Outside, the sky was crisp and blue. Raymond walked with me to the sidewalk. "Glad I could help," he said. "You didn't have to do that," I replied. "I did," he said, his voice firm. "Some people think HOA means harass our area. Someone's gotta draw the line." Back at the ranch, Bear greeted me like I'd won a war, and in a way, I had. But Karen wasn't done. A week later, I got a gold-trimmed invitation to the grand reopening of Willow Meadows HOA Event Center, featuring a scenic viewing platform facing my ranch. She'd built a deck just over my fence line, complete with a plaque, the Karen Hamilton Memorial Overlook, EST, to appreciate rural beauty and community peace. She was inviting people to watch my land like it was a zoo, binoculars and all. My jaw dropped. She couldn't come onto my land, so she'd found a new way to needle me. I was done being polite. The next morning, I walked to the fence line and saw it, a massive wooden platform, 10 feet from my boundary, with railings, lanterns, and HOA members sipping lattes, pointing at my barn. I marched back, opened the dog gate, and shouted, "Go say hello, boys." Bear, Tank, Luna, and 20 others charged up the ridge, barking like it was the 4th of July. The HOA guests screamed. A lady dropped her phone. A man leapt into the bushes. The overlook swayed under the panic. Karen watched from across the road, arms folded, smirking like she'd won. But I had something better than dogs, patience, and a plan. That night, I called Jack. "I want a privacy wall." He sighed. "That'll be expensive." "I don't care," I said. "A 20-foot wall, IV, motion-triggered sprinklers. If they peek, they get soaked." Jack chuckled. "You're really going to war, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I'm building my peace." The next few days were glorious chaos. Trucks rolled in, poles went up, panels were hauled. Karen filmed it all, thinking she was building a case. She didn't know I had permits, my land, my right. The day the wall went up, 20 feet tall, painted forest green, it was beautiful. No more peeping, no more pointing. I installed speakers and played "God Bless America" at sunrise, just loud enough for the overlook. Bear sat beside me, tail wagging, as Karen's visitors dwindled. The overlook stood, but it was abandoned. Nobody wanted coffee with patriotic music and no view. But Karen wasn't finished. One evening, Monica called. "Rick, sit down. She's suing again." My blood froze. "On what grounds?" "Defamation by obstruction," Monica said. "She claims your wall ruined her community project, and it's a targeted act to shame her. Plus, sonic harassment for the music." I hung up, staring at the wall. Karen was a nightmare, but I had one last idea, a community reckoning that would make her regret ever crossing me. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for my land, I was fighting for everyone she'd ever bullied, and I was going to make sure the whole town saw her fall. The sun dipped low over the hills, casting a warm golden glow across my ranch, the kind of light that makes you feel like the world's finally right again. Bear was sprawled out on the porch, his massive head resting on my boot, snoring softly as the crickets started their evening symphony. The other dogs were scattered around the barn, some chasing fireflies, others lounging in the cool grass, their tails flicking lazily. The 20-foot wall I'd built stood tall against the western fence, its forest green panels blending into the landscape, a silent sentinel blocking Karen's ridiculous memorial overlook. For the first time in months, the air felt clean, free of her schemes and her clipboard-wielding tyranny. I leaned back in my rocking chair, a glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand, and let myself breathe. Peace had returned to Cypress Creek, but it wasn't just peace, it was victory, hard-won and sweeter than any dessert Karen's caterers could have dreamed up. The weeks after the court ruling were like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Karen's lawsuits had crumbled faster than her wedding cake, her reputation shredded by the truth, and a few million viral video views. The protective order kept her 200 yards from my ranch, a legal moat she couldn't cross without risking handcuffs. The HOA board, finally free of her grip, sent me a formal letter of apology, promising to leave me alone for good. Neighbors kept stopping by, their gratitude piling up in the form of homemade pies, dog treats, and stories of Karen's reign of terror. It was humbling, but it also lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about a community reclaiming its spine, and I'd been the spark. But Karen, true to form, hadn't gone quietly. Her final job, that absurd scenic viewing platform, had been her last desperate attempt to needle me. She thought she could turn my ranch into a tourist attraction, inviting her HOA cronies to sip lattes and gawk at my goats like they were in a petting zoo. I'd shut that down with the wall, the sprinklers, and a daily blast of God Bless America that sent her followers running. When the city ordered her overlook dismantled for violating land use laws, and my hired crew tore it down during the Ranch Freedom Fest, the cheers from the crowd were louder than any wedding band. Karen had watched from her SUV, binoculars in hand, her smug grin fading into something like defeat. She drove off, and for a while, I thought that was the end of her. I was wrong. Karen had one last trick up her sleeve, a final swing that showed just how far she'd go to save face. A week after the overlook came down, I got a call from Monica, the reporter who'd turned my story into a national sensation. "Rick," she said, her voice tight with disbelief, "you need to brace yourself." Karen's filed a new motion. I set my coffee down, my stomach twisting. "What now?" I asked. "She's claiming your wall and the music constitute defamation by obstruction," Monica said. "Says you're deliberately sabotaging her community project and shaming her publicly. She's also suing for emotional distress again and wants you to pay for a new wedding for Paul and Jenny, plus damages for everyone who commented on my news post." I laughed, a hard, bitter sound that startled Bear awake. "She's lost it," I said. "Completely lost it." Monica didn't disagree. "She's calling it a media smear campaign orchestrated by you. Says you manipulated a fragile community member, her words, to humiliate her." I looked out at the wall, its ivy starting to climb, and felt a surge of resolve. Karen wanted to rewrite history, paint herself as the victim, and drag me back into her circus. But this time, I wasn't just going to fight, I was going to end her reign for good, and I was going to do it in a way that left no doubt who owned this ranch. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced, piecing together a plan that was less about courtrooms and more about community. Karen thrived on control, on fear, on people bowing to her demands. The only way to beat her was to take that away, to show the world who she really was. I opened my laptop and started typing, pouring 6 months of frustration into a Facebook post that laid out the whole saga: Karen's first visit, her complaints, the photographer, the wedding, the lawsuits, the overlook, and now this latest insanity. I attached everything: trail cam footage, the drone video of her saying, "He's just an old cowboy. He'll never find out," court documents, even a photo of that ridiculous Karen Hamilton Memorial Overlook plaque. I ended with a call to action. This isn't a feud. This is a warning. If someone like Karen can twist the system to harass a rancher, imagine what she'll do to your family. Enough is enough. I hit post at 3 a.m., not expecting much. By noon, it had 300,000 shares. By evening, news outlets were calling again, and Karen's HO's page was flooded with messages, some angry, some mocking, all united in one sentiment: she'd gone too far. Someone started selling t-shirts that said, "Let the dogs out?" Rick did. Another guy made a meme of Bear in sunglasses, captioned, "Dog approved." It was surreal, watching my quiet ranch become a symbol of resistance, but it felt right. Karen had tried to steal my peace, but she'd given me something better: purpose. That purpose became the Ranch Freedom Fest, a community event I'd been planning in secret with a few neighbors. I printed flyers and nailed them to every bulletin board in town. Ranch Freedom Fest, Saturday at noon. Celebrate peace, privacy, and people who mind their own business. Live music, food trucks, dog shows, and community awards. It wasn't just a party, it was a statement, a middle finger to Karen's control and a celebration of everything she'd tried to crush. The town showed up in droves. We had a petting zoo for the kids, bouncy houses, barbecued brisket that melted in your mouth, and a bluegrass band that had everyone dancing. I set up a cake smash station where people could throw pies at a cardboard cutout of Karen, and the line stretched halfway across the pasture. The dog parade was the highlight. Bear led the way, a red, white, and blue bandana tied around his neck, followed by 30 of his pack mates in costumes, cowboy hats, superhero capes, even a tiny tutu on Luna, my smallest Kangol. The crowd cheered, kids waving flags, adults snapping photos. People shared their own HOA horror stories, and I realized Karen's reach had been wider than I'd thought. She'd bullied families over fence colors, fined retirees for unapproved mailboxes, even tried to ban a kid's lemonade stand. The fest wasn't just about me, it was about all of us, taking back our freedom. As the sun set, I climbed onto a hay bale stage, a rusted horseshoe in one hand, a mic in the other. The crowd hushed, their faces glowing in the twilight. "Folks," I said, my voice steady, "thank you for coming. Today isn't about revenge. It's about community, about standing up when things get out of hand, and sending a message loud enough that even someone hiding behind a 20-foot wall can hear it." The crowd roared, clapping, whistling, a few folks stomping their boots. "But I'd be lying if I said we didn't have one more surprise," I continued, pointing to the ridge. Right on cue, a construction crew I'd hired that morning started dismantling Karen's overlook. The city had ruled it a violation of zoning laws, and since Karen hadn't responded to the notice, we had the green light to tear it down. As the railings fell and the pergola collapsed, the crowd erupted, cheering like it was a fireworks finale. I glanced at the road and saw her, Karen, in her white SUV, binoculars in hand, watching her last stand crumble. For the first time, she wasn't smirking. She wasn't shouting. She just looked broken, like she'd finally realized the game was over. She backed away slowly, and I knew she wouldn't be back. The fallout was swift. Karen dropped her lawsuits, resigned from the HOA, and sold her house to a retired firefighter who breeds golden retrievers, a fitting replacement. The HOA board sent another apology, this time with a promise to reform their rules. Letters poured in from across the country, thanking me for standing up, offering advice on dealing with their own Karens, or just sending treats for Bear and the pack. One package stood out, left on my porch with no return address. Inside was a framed photo of Paul and Jenny, the wedding couple, holding hands under a gazebo at their real ceremony. A note read, "Thank you for being the reason we had the most unforgettable wedding ever." I smiled, and Bear barked once, his tail thumping the floor. But the real moment came a month later when I got a call from Jenny. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice warm, "it's Jenny from the wedding. Paul and I are having our proper ceremony next week, and we want you and Bear there as honored guests." I leaned back, surprised. "You sure you want me? I'm the guy who sent 40 dogs to crash your big day." She laughed, a sound full of light. "That day was unforgettable because of you. You stood up for us, even when you didn't have to. And, one more thing, would you walk me down the aisle?" I blinked, my throat tightening. "You want me to walk you down the aisle?" "Yes," she said. "Because you fought for what's right, and that's what family does." I didn't say much after that, just agreed and hung up, the wind rustling through the oaks. Bear looked up, his eyes soft, like he knew what was coming. The wedding was small, held in a garden outside town, with wildflowers and lanterns strung between trees. I wore my best boots, Bear at my side with a bow tie that made the kids giggle. When I took Jenny's arm, her dress shimmering in the evening light, I felt something shift, a weight lifting, a purpose settling. Paul waited at the altar, his smile wide, and as we walked, the crowd stood, clapping softly. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a promise, a reminder that standing up matters, that community holds stronger than any HOA rulebook. Back at the ranch, life returned to its rhythm. The goats grazed, the dogs patrolled, and my woodworking shop hummed with new projects. But the fight with Karen had changed me. She'd come for my peace, thinking she could bully me into submission, but she'd given me something greater, a community that stood together, a story that inspired others, and a bond with people like Jenny and Paul that no lawsuit could break. The wall stayed up, the sprinklers ready, the speakers silent but waiting. If Karen ever dared return, I had 40 reasons why she shouldn't, each one with a wagging tail and a bark that could shake the hills. As I sit here now, coffee in hand, the stars blinking awake above Cypress Creek, I can't help but grin. Karen thought she could take my freedom, but she only made it stronger. She thought she could write the story, but I held the pen. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When you fight for what's yours, your land, your peace, your people, you don't just win. You build something unbreakable, something that echoes far beyond the fences of a Texas ranch. So here's to the dogs, the neighbors, the truth that bites harder than any lawsuit. And to Karen, wherever she's licking her wounds, don't come back. Because this cowboy's ready, and next time, I won't just crash your party, I'll burn the stage down.